Picture Paris. The lights glitter along the Seine. The luxury boutiques on the Champs-Élysées are packed with customers clutching Louis Vuitton bags. The cafés are overflowing with people drinking expensive wine, discussing art and philosophy. From the outside, it looks like the pinnacle of civilization. A nation that has figured it all out. A country of immense, accumulated wealth and unbeatable lifestyle. But what if I told you that image is a lie? What if I told you that beneath the gold plating, the entire structure is rotting away? France isn't thriving. It is slowly, quietly suffocating. This isn't a temporary recession. It is a terminal decline hidden in plain sight by mountains of debt and a global reputation that no longer matches reality. We are looking at a Potemkin village on the scale of a G7 nation. A beautiful facade concealing an economic engine that has completely seized up. We are about to tear down the facade of one of the world's most idealized economies. If you want the truth about global power shifts and economic realities that mainstream media is too afraid to touch, you need to subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. We don't sugarcoat it here. And before we dive into the collapse, I want you to answer this in the comments below. If a country looks rich on Instagram, but its average citizen can barely afford rent and food at the end of the month, is it actually wealthy? Let me know your thoughts. Hit the like button to help spread this message, and let's expose the illusion. The collapse of France won't happen overnight. You won't wake up tomorrow and see the Paris stock market at zero. That's Hollywood stuff. The reality is far more insidious. It is a slow-motion car crash happening over decades. The world still treats France as a powerhouse, a cornerstone of Europe. But the reality on the ground is a hollowed-out shell of its former self. We are witnessing the systematic dismantling of a once vibrant middle class. The total erasure of industrial might that once defined the nation. And a reliance on debt that is mathematically impossible to sustain forever. This is the story of how a former superpower turns into a theme park for the global rich, while its own citizens are pushed into poverty. To understand the silent collapse, you have to start with the people. The backbone of any strong economy is its middle class. The promise that if you work hard, get educated, and contribute, you will get ahead. In France, that promise has been broken. It has been shattered into a million pieces. They have a word for it in France. Smicardization. It refers to the SMIC, the minimum wage. Over the last 20 years, France has experienced a horrific leveling process. Decades ago, a minimum wage job was a starting point. Today, it is becoming the destination for nearly everyone. Imagine a ladder of opportunity. In a healthy economy, there are dozens of rungs, allowing you to climb from entry-level to middle management, to senior expert, to executive wealth. In France, someone has taken a chainsaw to the middle rungs of that ladder. Here is the terrifying reality for a young French person today. You study hard. You go to university for 5 years. You get a master's degree in engineering, or law, or finance. You enter the workforce with high hopes. And then you look at your paycheck. You realize that after taxes, after social charges, you are earning barely a few €100 more than the guy who dropped out of high school and is flipping burgers or stocking shelves. The gap between unskilled labor and highly skilled professionals has collapsed. The French government, in a desperate attempt to keep unemployment numbers down, heavily subsidizes minimum wage jobs, making them cheap for employers. But as soon as you pay someone a decent middle-class salary, the taxes and charges explode. So, companies don't do it. They keep everyone trapped at the bottom. Think about the psychological impact of that. Why would anyone take on the stress, the responsibility, and the long hours of a demanding career when the financial reward is practically non-existent? Ambition is being taxed out of existence. The drive to innovate, to build, to climb, is being systematically crushed by a system that punishes success and subsidizes stagnation. When you kill the ambition of your young people, you kill the future of your economy. You create a society of people who are just trying to survive, rather than trying to thrive. It is a nation treading water, waiting to drown. But if the people aren't making money, surely the country itself is still producing value? Wrong again. This brings us to the second massive crack in the foundation, the Great Industrial Vanishing Act. There was a time when "Made in France" meant something powerful. It meant nuclear reactors. It meant high-speed TGV trains. It meant advanced aerospace and the Concorde. France was an engineering powerhouse, a country that built real, tangible things that the world needed. Look at a map of France today. Outside of a few glittering metropolitan hubs like Paris, Lyon, or Bordeaux, the country is dotted with industrial graveyards. Regions that were once the beating heart of production, the north, the east, are now economic ghost towns. Factories that employed thousands have been shuttered for decades, their windows broken, machinery sold off for scrap. The jobs went east, to China, to Poland, to anywhere labor was cheaper and regulations were looser. And France, seemingly asleep at the wheel, let it happen. Between 2000 and 2020, France lost nearly 1 million industrial jobs. Its share of GDP coming from industry collapsed to levels lower than Greece. Think about that. A G7 nation with less industrial base than an economy that required a massive bailout just to survive. When you stop making things, you become dependent on others. You lose the ability to control your own destiny. During the recent global health crisis, France, the country of Louis Pasteur, discovered it couldn't even manufacture enough basic painkillers or masks for its own population. It was a humiliating wake-up call that revealed just how hollow out the productive economy had become. They had outsourced their sovereignty. The government talks endlessly about reindustrialization. They announce flashy plans and throw subsidies at electric battery plants. But it's like putting a band-aid on a severed limb. The ecosystem of small and medium-sized factories, the suppliers, the skilled toolmakers, once they are gone almost forever. You cannot just snap your fingers and bring back generations of industrial know-how. So, if they aren't making things, and the middle class is squeezed, what is keeping the lights on? This is where the illusion becomes almost tragic. France is slowly transforming into a giant open-air museum. The transition from an industrial powerhouse to a service-based economy is common in the West. But France has taken it to a dangerous extreme. They have bet the house on tourism and luxury. The strategy is simple. If we can't build the future, we will sell our past. France is the world's #1 tourist destination. Millions flood into Paris, the Loire Valley, and the French Riviera every year. They come to see the Eiffel Tower, wander the Louvre, drink champagne, and buy expensive handbags. On the surface, this looks like success. It brings in foreign currency. It keeps the city centers looking vibrant. LVMH, the luxury conglomerate behind Louis Vuitton and Dior, is one of the most valuable companies in Europe. Its owner, Bernard Arnault, is often the richest man in the world. This immense concentration of luxury wealth masks the rot beneath. It creates a statistical mirage that makes France look richer than it is. But an economy built on serving tourists and selling luxury goods to foreign billionaires is incredibly fragile. It is a Disneyland economy. Think about the jobs tourism creates. It doesn't create engineers or scientists. It creates waiters, hotel maids, tour guides, and retail clerks. These are low-wage, low-productivity jobs with zero job security. When a pandemic hits, or a global recession strikes, or a war breaks out in Europe, the tourists stop coming. The luxury buyers tighten their belts. And the Disneyland economy grinds to a halt overnight. We saw this happen. The country was paralyzed. But even when the tourists are there, it creates a bizarre, stratified society. You have the ultra-wealthy owners of the luxury brands, a small elite living in the center of Paris. Then you have the tourists, temporarily enjoying the high life. And then you have the vast majority of French people, who are essentially the cast members in this theme park, serving coffee and cleaning rooms they could never afford to stay in themselves. It turns the nation into a servant economy. It is a humiliating come-down for a country that once saw itself as the center of global intellectual and industrial power. Instead of leading the world in technology, they are leading the world in hospitality. It pays the bills in the short term, but it is not a foundation for a 21st century power. But even with tourism, even with the luxury brands, the numbers don't add up. France spends vastly more than it earns. Which leads us to the most terrifying aspect of this silent collapse: the addiction to debt. If France were a business, it would have been declared insolvent years ago. The French government hasn't run a balanced budget since the 1970s. Think about that. For 50 years, through booms and busts, through peace and crises, they have consistently spent more money than they brought in taxes. For decades, this didn't seem to matter. Interest rates were practically zero. Money was free. Governments could borrow trillions without consequence. France treated the bond markets like an infinite credit card with no spending limit. They used debt to plug the holes in the dying industrial sector. They used debt to subsidize the low wages. They used debt to maintain the illusion of a high-functioning welfare state. Today, France's public debt is soaring past 110% of its GDP. That is nearly 3 trillion euros. It is a number so large it becomes abstract. But let me make it concrete for you. Every single year, France becomes one of the biggest issuers of debt on the planet, just to keep the lights on. They have to borrow hundreds of billions just to pay the interest on the money they already borrowed, and to fund current government operations. It is the classic definition of a Ponzi scheme. It only works as long as new money keeps flowing in, and as long as the cost of borrowing remains low. But the era of free money is over. Interest rates have risen fiercely across the globe. The cost of servicing that massive mountain of debt is exploding. Soon, France will spend more on interest payments to foreign banks than it spends on its own military, or even its education system. Think about the insanity of that. The taxes of hard-working French citizens are not going to build schools or hospitals. They are being siphoned off just to pay the vigorish on decades of financial irresponsibility. The walls are closing in. The financial markets, which for years gave France a pass because it was too big to fail, are starting to get nervous. Credit rating agencies are downgrading France's outlook. The gap between what Germany pays to borrow money and what France pays is widening. That gap is the fear premium. It's the market saying, "We don't trust you anymore." When that trust breaks, and history tells us it always does, eventually, the correction will be brutal. We are talking about austerity measures that will make current struggles look like a picnic. We are talking about slashing pensions, gutting public services, and raising taxes in an economy that is already suffocating. And that brings us to the great paradox of French life. The taxation nightmare. If you ask a French person why they tolerate such high taxes, France has the highest tax burden in the developed world, they will usually point to their public services. Yes, we pay a lot, they say, but we have world-class healthcare, free education, and safe streets. That was the old deal. That was the social contract of the post-war era. High taxes in exchange for high-quality services. Today, that contract is null and void. The taxes are still astronomically high. The average French worker hands over nearly half their income to the state in one form or another. But the services are collapsing before their eyes. The healthcare system, once the envy of the world, is cracking. Emergency rooms are overcrowded, experiencing crisis after crisis. In rural areas, it is becoming impossible to find a doctor. We are seeing medical deserts spreading across the map. The education system, once famous for its rigor, is sliding down international rankings. Teachers are underpaid and overwhelmed, dealing with crumbling infrastructure and rising violence in schools. The police are stretched to the breaking point, unable to cope with rising crime and constant social unrest in the suburbs. So the average French citizen is left asking a very dangerous question: where is my money going? If I am paying penthouse prices, why am I living in the basement? The reality is that the money is going to service the debt and to prop up a bloated, inefficient bureaucratic machine that seems incapable of reforming itself. France has more layers of government, more elected officials, and more public administrators per capita than almost anywhere else. It is a Kafkaesque maze of red tape that sucks up resources and stifles action. The French people feel cheated. They are squeezed by low wages on one side and predatory taxes on the other, all while watching the quality of their daily lives degrade. This is why you see constant protests. The yellow vests, the pension reform riots, these aren't just about specific policies. They are screams of rage from a population that feels the social contract has been betrayed. When a system becomes this dysfunctional, when hard work isn't rewarded, and when the future looks bleak, human beings do what they have always done. They vote with their feet. We are witnessing a tragic exodus of talent from France. It is a brain drain that is sapping the country of its vital energy. Every year, Tens of thousands of the brightest, most ambitious young French people pack their bags and leave. They go to London, to New York, to Singapore, to Dubai, to Silicon Valley. They aren't leaving because they hate France. They love their culture. They love their lifestyle. They are leaving because France has told them, loudly and clearly, there is no future for you here. If you want to build a tech startup, why would you do it in a country with punishing taxes and impossible labor laws, when you could go to Austin or London? If you are a brilliant financial analyst, why stay in Paris and earn half of what you could make in Manhattan, while paying double the tax? I have spoken to many of these expats. Their stories are all the same. They describe a feeling of suffocation in France, a ceiling they hit very early in their careers. They describe a culture that is suspicious of success, a crabs-in-a-bucket mentality where anyone trying to climb out is pulled back down. When they leave, they don't just take their current skills. They take their future potential. They take the companies they would have built, the patents they would have filed, the jobs they would have created. France is exporting its greatest asset, its human capital, and getting nothing in return. The people left behind are an aging population that needs pensions and healthcare, and a low-skilled workforce trapped in the service sector. This is a demographic death spiral. Fewer productive workers to support more dependents, requiring higher taxes on the few who remain, which drives more of them to leave. It is a vicious cycle that is almost impossible to break. The government knows this is happening. They try to lure people back with tax breaks and Choose France summits. But it's too little, too late. You cannot reverse decades of structural hostility toward ambition with a few marketing campaigns. The best and brightest have already done the math. And the math says, leave. So, where does this end? What is the climax of this slow-motion tragedy? The terrifying reality is that France is not an outlier. It is a mirror. It is the canary in the coal mine for the entire Western world. If you are watching this from the United States, the UK, or Canada, don't get too comfortable. Don't think this is just a French problem. Look closely at your own economy. Do you see a hollowing out of the middle class? Do you see industrial jobs vanishing, replaced by low-wage service work? Do you see a government addicted to debt, printing trillions to keep the illusion of prosperity alive? Do you see infrastructure crumbling while taxes keep rising? France is just further down the road than most. They have hit the wall first because their system was more rigid, less adaptable. But the same forces of globalization, financialization, and debt addiction are at work everywhere. The silent collapse of France is a warning siren for the West. It shows that you cannot survive forever on past glories. You cannot run a 21st century economy on debt and tourism. You cannot treat your productive class as a piggy bank to be raided until it's empty. Eventually, reality catches up. The luxury facade cracks. The tourists stay home. The bond markets demand their money. And the people, exhausted and cheated, refuse to play the game anymore. France is facing an existential crisis. It is a battle between a comfortable, paralyzing illusion and a cold, hard reality. The current path leads inevitably to a severe correction, a massive drop in living standards, social upheaval, and a permanent relegation to second-tier status on the world stage. Avoiding that fate would require political courage that doesn't seem to exist anymore. It would require tearing up the broken social contract and writing a new one. It would require telling the French people hard truths they do not want to hear. The story of France is not just history or economics. It is a live-fire exercise for the future of the West. The question isn't just whether France can save itself. It's whether any of us can learn the lesson before our own illusions come crashing down. Look around your own country. Do you see the same cracks forming? The same debt piling up? The same hollowing out of what once made the nation strong? This isn't just French history. It is very likely your future. If this analysis opened your eyes to the reality behind the headlines, share this video with someone who needs a wake-up call. The battle for economic reality is just beginning. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.